This is Vue, Tailwind, and FrappeUI Training. So this is not just FrappeUI Training. We assume that you just know basics of HTML, CSS, and some web development, JavaScript. And we'll start from scratch. We will start from DOM manipulation itself, and then DOM manipulation. Why? Because I want to show you why a framework like Vue.js might be needed and what problem it is trying to solve. And then we'll jump onto Vue, right? So why, right? Why learn this particular stack? Why I combine Vue plus Tailwind and FrappeUI? Because FrappeUI is based on Vue.js and Tailwind CSS. And Vue.js is a JavaScript framework. Tailwind CSS is used for styling. And we are building heavily on this. All the labs product work on this stack. If you see Insights, Builder, any Frappe product you pick up, right? Like we are using this. And now we are rewriting the desk, which is the Frappe framework's actual admin interface, and rewriting that in Vue, Frappe UI, and Tailwind as well. So this is like going to become the core part of Frappe's stack. So worth it to learn, right? So what are the goals out of this training? So I don't want to make you an expert on like all the three things. I just want to give you some broad foundations on all the three and make a final project where everything connects. So you get the idea of how a Vue.js app fits in the framework stack, right? How actually this app gets served from our custom apps, right? What Doppio does behind the scenes. So you might have seen Doppio on my repo and like it just one command and it sets up everything for you. We'll start from scratch and we'll see what it actually does behind the scenes for you. So you know that if something goes wrong, you will be able to debug it out. Cool. So these are the goals to give you the basics of Vue.js, all the pillars, and then some Tailwind CSS. And we'll do all of this hands-on. So slides are just few 7 or 8 slides, but we'll get to building and then we'll continue from there, taking use cases and building to see how we can apply what we are learning, right? So how is this structured? We'll start with DOM manipulation and then we'll learn some Vue.js fundamentals and we'll try to correlate the two on how Vue.js makes the above easier, right? And then we'll run some Tailwind CSS basics. We'll style an app together. Then finally, we will combine everything and build an app in Frappe UI. So we'll learn Frappe UI basics first, and then we'll jump to the actual uh, logic or actual magic that comes with Frappe UI, right? So why did Frappe choose the Vue.js tech stack? Okay, so I think the first person who started using Vue.js in production at Frappe was Faris, and he liked Vue.js uh, better than React. So I think that's how Vue.js started. But I have also come to appreciate why Vue.js might be like easier to pick up, easier to learn. It has like flexibility in APIs. So it has two kinds of APIs. We'll learn about it so you can make a decision for yourselves, right? Cool. So we'll start with document object model or the DOM. So all of you might know, right? What what are we doing as a web developer, right? We are ultimately generating three things: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML is defines the structure of the page, right? H1, div, whatever appears on the page, right? And what does CSS do? Cascading style sheets. They style that HTML, right? Okay, this H1 should be red. It has a padding of 20 pixels, so on and so forth. That is the role CSS plays. And the third thing is JavaScript, right? It lets us add interactivity. It lets us listen to events. When something is clicked, do this. When um, user drags this thing to this, do this, right? That sort of interactivity stuff. And when you when the browser gets HTML, right, it maps it to a data structure called the document object model or the DOM, right? So this is an example you will see on the screen. So on the left hand side, I have a div which contains an h2 with a text hello, and then there is an unordered list with three LIs. So On the right hand side, you will see what we call the DOM tree of this partial. So this is a partial DOM tree. There might be HTML and then body, after that div, right? So you can see it's like a tree-like structure. So div, and it has two childrens, right? H2 and UL. And even H2 has a text child. UL has three child, li. So this is how the browser represents it, right? And this doesn't stop here, right? The browser represents it manipulates it, it does all the stuff, whatever you say it is, but it also gives you as a developer access to this document object, right? And then you can basically do whatever interactivity stuff that you want. You can apply dynamic styles, you can delete the whole section, right? Or add new nodes. So these are called nodes, right? DOM nodes. If you hear that, don't panic. These are just like the nodes of the tree or HTML elements, right? This was DOM. Let me just explain what we are going to do. So we want to create a counter, right? So let me just switch here. So I've created a basic HTML file here and opened it up on the right side on the browser using a VS Code extension called live server, right? And whenever you do some changes, it will just update it here. That's it. Very simple setup, just one index.html file. That's it. If you want to follow along, just create an index.html file and open it up in your browser. That's it. So what do we want to start with, right? So we want to start by making a counter, and let me just minimize this part. Okay. So counter as in like we want a button, right? And a display, right? So whenever the user clicks the button, we want to increment that counter. So 0 becomes 1, and then 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, so on and so forth. So let's start, I guess. So what things will we need in the DOM, right? Right now there is just an H1. Let's just remove it. We don't want it. We want a button, right? Let's create a button called increment. And we have this nice button here, right? And what else do we need? We need some element where we can display this count, right? So I'll start with 0. So right now nothing will happen because we have just a button that does nothing. And we have a display that is static, right? It's 0. It's not changing in any way, right? So this is where now we'll start writing some JavaScript. So I will add a script tag. I'll just write it here without creating a separate file and linking it. What do we want, right? So first thing we want is to be able to listen to this button click, right? And if you have even some basic experience, you might know that we can say that ID. We can directly do on click, right? Okay, on click, and refer a function here that, okay, on click of this button, call this function, right? So let's call it increment count, right? And I will add this here, function increment count, and let's just console log for now, button click. So this is basic event listening stuff, and I will open up JavaScript console, and whenever I click, okay, it doesn't work. Yeah, so we missed the parentheses because this shouldn't have mattered. So let's bring it back. See, when you click the button, it triggers your code, and that's it, right? But what do we want to do, right? We want to update this 0. What is this 0? This is a p tag. And like, how do we update it, right? Like, assume you don't know about the DOM or the document object or anything. How do you actually update this? In terms of like dynamic stuff that you can write in Frappe or the server side, what you do is you use Jinja, right? And you have Jinja variables. So whenever you request a page, that Jinja variables are replaced with dynamic data, and then the HTML is returned, right? That's one kind of dynamic. But here we want it to change on click, right? We want to change this thing or the text in this paragraph to 1, 2, so on and so forth. So how do we do that? So here we will use DOM manipulation. So let's give it an ID. So we'll give it an ID of let's say counter display, right? And then in the script, we can just note this counter display equal to document. This is the document object. So it is called document all lowercase. And then you can access the DOM tree with it. The tree we saw, right? This tree, you can access it. You just have to tell which node you want or which set of nodes you want. You can get multiple or a single. In this case, we just want this p tag with an ID of counter display. So we can directly say get element by ID. There is get element by class name, by name, so on and so forth. So let's say I want counter display, right? So this will give us this node, right? And then we can dynamically manipulate it, right? So what will I do for now? I will say counter display dot inner HTML or inner text. There are two options. So we can do inner text equal to empty string. And when I hit save, you will notice that is gone, right? There was a 0, but that is no longer there. Because what did we do? When this script runs, we get this DOM node, right? We get this counter display or the p tag, and we set its inner text to empty string. It was 0, but we overrode it, overridden it, or whatever is the past tense of that, to an empty string. Makes sense? This is very easy. Like I'm starting very slow. If you have any doubt, just post them in the chat. And this is how we can do this is DOM manipulation, right? Get the DOM nodes, manipulate them, right? You can even add new nodes. Suppose I want to have a div here, right? Let's give it an ID of something, right? And then you can follow the same procedure. You can say something equal to document dot get element by ID something, right? And then you can say my new button, let's say, let const doesn't matter, document dot create element. See, you can even create new DOM nodes. So we can tell what type of node do you want to create, right? We want to create a button, right? And then you can add my new button. So it won't be visible anywhere. You have created this, like you have the DOM node in your hand, but you haven't attached it to the tree anywhere, right? So we'll have to attach it to the tree. So how can we do that? We can say we want it to be attached to our this something div, append child, and then you can say my new button. Wait. Something. Okay. Spelling mistake. See, my new button. So we were able to create and append new child. I'll delete this. Let's proceed with the counter first. Okay. Let's delete this as well. Okay. I don't want to reset it. So I will keep it at 0. But how do we maintain this, right? We'll need some kind of variable to maintain what is the current count. So let's start with that first. Let count equal to 0. So it starts at 0. That is fine. That is completely all right. And then when they click the button, we want it to increment, right? So count plus plus. So 0 will become 1, 1 will become 2, so on and so forth. Will this text change? No. Is the variable value changing? Yes. So variable value is changing, but the DOM isn't updating, right? This isn't updating because we are doing nothing to update it, right? So we can say counter display dot inner text or inner HTML, both work, equal to count. And now notice when I click the button, it will update, right? This is actually what we wanted. So whenever you click the button, it updates, right? So what did we do? We updated the DOM. So here we are combining two important concepts of writing JavaScript in the front end, which is basically getting the DOM nodes and manipulating them. Also listening to events. So there is one more way to listen to events. You can give it an ID. Let's say counter or increment button. Let's give it a proper name. Increment button. And I can do the same thing here. Const increment button equal to document dot get element by ID increment button, right? And then you can attach the listener. Increment button dot add event listener, click increment count. Make sense? So this is another way of attaching event listeners directly from your script, not worrying about your HTML part, right? So this is a simple counter, nice going. And we now have a requirement of implementing a reset button, right? The reset button. So we want a button, right, which resets the counter to 0. So what's the procedure? We can say ID. Let's give it an ID of reset button. We'll do get element again. Let's get that button and listen to its click. Reset button equal to document dot get element by ID reset button. Now again we can add a event listener here to the reset button dot event listener, click, and I will add an arrow function here. I'm not writing a separate function. Let's say console.log resetting, right? And now if I click reset, you will see that resetting is being printed, which is actually what we wanted. Halfway there. So what do we want? We want count to become 0, right? Count equal to 0. Let's try incrementing and reset. Again, notice, like, even if you update the variable, it's your job as a developer to update the DOM again. So we'll call this again. So let's say counter display dot inner text equal to count, right? Just notice the flow. I'm not going to teach you whole DOM manipulation. I just want to make a point that what are you doing, right? When you are working with some state, so this is the state, like the count, right? This is 0. And you have some DOM elements, you are listening to them. But whenever you are changing something, it's your job to update the DOM, right? It's your job to change what appears on this UI side of things, right? So this was one example. Let's take a quick break for questions and then we'll proceed to the next example, which is a more sophisticated example than this one. Cool. Any questions till now? Cool. Let's proceed to the next one. Okay, there is a question. Difference between inner text and inner HTML. Okay, let me show you the difference. Counter. Okay, I deleted the whole thing. Let me just delete the part which we don't need. Counter display dot inner text. So you will have to see this in parts. So when I use, so I'm passing some HTML string, right? And when I use inner text, see, it is not converting the string into HTML. It's just treating it as normal text. But when you do inner HTML, it will actually prepend or append HTML inside that thing. Make sense? Cool. Let's close the console. If it is clear, let's proceed to the next task we have at hand. So we have to implement a simple to-do list using vanilla JavaScript. We are not allowed to use any kind of web framework. So let's start. So what is the basic thing we need for to do, right? We need an input where the user can input the to do text, right? Here I added an input. Let's add a label as well. Label description, and I will give it an ID of to do description for to do description. Nice. So now they can enter like whatever they want, and we want a button to create a to do. So let's say, so I'll use a form for this because that's better, because clearly this is a form, and let's stick to semantic HTML. Action we won't worry about because we are not submitted into we are not connecting a backend or submitting this form to a backend. We'll handle it directly in our script. And let's add an input of submit. Value will be create. Let's add h to my to do app. Cool. Makes sense. We added the markup. Nothing like interactivity doesn't work. So it's just resetting the form. The default behavior of the browser is try to submit this form and do stuff, right? But we don't want that. I will just give this form an ID of, let's say, to do form. And in the script, I will get this form, right? The DOM node or the form element to do form equal to document dot get element by ID to do form, right? And then we can attach event listener, add event listener. We don't want click, right? Otherwise it will be like wherever you click on the form, it will trigger. We want submit event. So whenever this form is submitted, we want to run this piece of code, right? So let's say console.log form submitted, and I will add a required attribute here. So HTML makes sure that before they can submit the form, they have to fulfill the validations. Again, open up JavaScript console. So if you see, if I try to create it without the description, it will yell at me. So let's say buy milk and create, see form submitted, right? But there is some issue, like it appeared for a split second and then went away. Just notice milk, buy milk. See, it appeared and then went away. What is happening? So browser is doing its actual thing as well. So after console logging, it's also trying to submit it to a web server and reload, right? So what we have to do is we have to prevent it from doing that. So we can do that using this. We get an event object here. We can say e dot prevent default. So this will prevent the default behavior of the browser, right? So when you do this now by milk and hit create, you will see form submitted and the page didn't get refreshed because we prevented the default behavior, right? Some part of it is done. We are handling the form submit, but where is our to-do list, right? This is our to-do app. Where is the list? So we'll need a, let's come out of the form. Let's add an ordered list here. First to do, right? So let's give it an ID, to-do list. Nice. What's the next step, right? What we want is whatever the user enters here and hits create, right? We want to add it to our to-do list, right? That's what a to-do app is. So I will remove console log. So to append something to this to-do list or this ordered list HTML element, we'll have to get it in the DOM and then manipulate it, right? So let's say const to-do list equal to document dot get element by ID to-do list, and then they're submitting some stuff, right? So in HTML, if you want the data that was submitted, right, we can just say this form data. Let's data. Let's call it data. New form data, and then give it the form element. To do form. So this will process the data that was submitted in the form and will let us access whatever input fields we want. So for that, we'll have to give it a name. So let's call it to do itself. And if you try to console.log data.get to do. Yeah, I'm just console logging whatever this key is in the form, right? See, exactly what we wanted, right? Because what this thing is doing is, right, this part, it is processing the form values and using this name for the key of that value. So this is just like, think of it as like the dictionary, right? So this is the key and the value is the which the user entered. So now we have the to do. There is just one piece left. We want to append it to this list. Let's do that now. So let's move this part to do, right? And now how do we append, right? We'll say to do dot rule list dot append child. So append child takes a node, right? So we'll have to create a node first. And what kind of node? We want a node of type li, which is the list, right? So we'll have to create li. Let's say const li equal to document dot create element, right? We saw this. This lets us create new DOM elements. And this time we want an li tag. And li will have inner text as the to do that the user entered. And then we'll just append it to the DOM. Let's try it out. By milk create. Okay, cannot read properties of null. This. What did we do this time? Hmm. Uh-uh. Yeah. Thanks. Happens. You can see as I'm like nervous. And I can't switch on the fan because it will make a lot of noise. So probably I will drink water. Fine, it happens. You do these things and you are like, I would have taken like 30 minutes probably to figure this out without the hint. But that's developer life. So yeah, buy milk. And yeah, this works, right? So confetti time. So we are able to do, so as you can see, this didn't get reset automatically. We can do that using form to do form dot reset. So there is a reset method and then by milk create. And as you can see, the form was reset, right? So this is the process. What did we do? We got the elements and we added event listener. We prevented the default behavior. And then we created an li tag on the fly and appended it to the DOM and reset the form. So this is all DOM manipulation. That's it. Vanilla JS, uh, nothing, no libraries, nothing. Just plain stuff. Right? Now what do we want to do? But there is an issue with this, right? The issue is, where are we maintaining this list here, right? If we want to do some calculation or show the count somehow, how do we do that, right? So this is not a good way to do this. So we'll have to do this in a better way. Let's create a array, right? To do's, and I will get rid of this logic where we are appending the child, or we can let it be. But we'll have to maintain a state, right? That okay, this was the to do's. And I will tell you why we are doing this. Tell me, how will we implement delete? So suppose I added a delete button inside this, right? Let's say I added a button. Let's call it delete. And let's add a trash can emoji here. How will we implement this, right? So each to do will have a delete button, right? And once that delete button is clicked, we have to delete that particular to do. But how do we do that right now? So we'll have to get the list, we'll have to check which button was clicked, right? And then either we give every one of them a unique ID whenever we are prepending and then delete them, right? So this becomes kind of like a lot more code, right? So the easier way is to just maintain an index, right? And maintaining an index means an array, right? So I'll do that. There are other ways to do it, as Nikhil pointed out. We can have an ID and we can have that ID being passed around to the delete function. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a to-dos array. And whenever the user gives us a new to-do, I'll just append, or append is in Python, push is in JavaScript. Push this to-do to the list. And then I'll just call a function here, render list. Let's come here, render list. And then what did I do? What did I change? I'm not doing any creating of li here. I'm just calling this render list function and I will render the list from scratch. So what I will do is I will loop over let I equal to 0. I is less than to do's dot length plain iteration for loop, which we don't see in Python. So if you're coming from C++ or Java, this will feel right at home. So yeah, what I will do is I will get the list. So I'll prepare some HTML. I'm not directly calling document.create element. I'm just writing the manual HTML and I will use the inner HTML function to append it to the list. Let's give it. So this is string formatting JavaScript. To do's of I, right? And then I will say, we'll add a delete button here. Button. I could have moved this button. Let's cut it from here. Add it here. And now I will say on click delete to do. And then give it this I, right? A different way of doing it, but still works. We created a to do, right? An li tag with the text as well as a button, which calls the delete to do with the index of this to do, this particular to do. And now the final thing is to append this, right? To do We can optimize it. If we append one by one, it will be a little. So let's do this list HTML. I will create an empty this plus equal. And after the for loop is completed, we'll have all the li tags. At the end, I will just say to do list dot inner HTML equal to this list HTML that we have created. Let me just explain it once more. What are we doing? We created an empty string and we are appending all the li tags for all the to-dos that are in this to-dos array that we created. And once that is done, the loop is completed. We are just overriding the inner HTML to use this HTML, right? And we can call it right here as well. It will override anything that was inside it. So let's remove it. We don't want any to do out of the box. So now let's try it out. By milk, create, and you see there is our buy milk to do with a delete button, which was created by this. And how do we do the actual delete, right? We called a delete to do function, but we haven't defined it. Let's define it here. Function delete to do, and it will get an ID of the to do or index. Let's call it index. Now this is simple JavaScript, right? What I will do is I will just do to-dos dot splice. So there is a splice method. I want to remove one element from this index, right? So let's try this. A, let's create a few. B, C, right? And if I call delete, doesn't delete, right? Why? Can anyone tell me why? JavaScript works in weird ways. So even if you don't give let const, it does some magic. Yeah, have to update the DOM, right? We updated the data in our internal state or variables, but we didn't update the DOM. We have to update the DOM. So again, since we have the reusable function, we can again call it render list, and it is like, again, we'll re-render stuff. So let's say I created more to-dos and let's delete this one. Now delete works. It was deleting the thing from the list, but we weren't updating the DOM. So it is our job as a developer to update the DOM. Right? So that's it. Your homework, just implement edit on this form. That's it for DOM manipulation. So just notice the process. You get access to some DOM elements. You work with them. Either you listen to their events or you manipulate them, right? Here we on the fly created some li tags and then set the inner HTML of this thing to whatever we generated, right? Whatever list we generated. And then again delete. So do whatever you want, but make sure you update the DOM, right? This is where frameworks like VueJS and React is a library. So JavaScript libraries like this come in handy. There you don't have to directly manage the DOM, right? You don't have to say, okay, get this button and update the text to this. Or whenever you change something, what do you say? Like manually update the DOM yourself, right? That's like the main pain point Vue.js or any front-end library that does this sort of stuff is trying to do, right? So if you see quickly, this got out of hand, right? Creating this on the fly, setting this inner HTML. If you forget, so if you implement Reddit as well, you have to make sure you re-render the list. Not gonna scale. So this was just a simple to do app. Imagine like building an app like builder with this, where like you click one button, like there are 10 places on the page that need to be re-rendered. And if you do this inefficient thing where we are basically re-rendering, like suppose there are a million to-dos, right? We are throwing away the million to-dos when we delete just one to-do and again creating those million DOM nodes. So this takes memory, right? This takes memory. This thing, the DOM, the bigger it is, the more memory it takes because the browser has to keep it in memory, and whenever you access it, it has to give you a proper access fast. And then if there are a million of this, it counts. When you have to update one, it also takes time, right? So there is some complexity or efficiency that you have to think about, right? And this framework have that figured out with a concept called virtual DOM. So what they do is, like, I'll come to it, like I'm just giving you a bit of an overview. What it does is they maintain their own internal structure, right, on top of the DOM, and you ask them to update some data, and behind the scenes they will go and update the DOM for you in the most efficient manner possible. So if you were to implement this, we'll implement this in Vue as well. To delete one element, it won't go and delete 1 million and then again render the 1 million. It will just make sure it deletes that particular element. And yeah, so as a developer, you don't have to worry about like going one level down the abstraction tree. Cool. So think about how you will implement it and implement it by tomorrow. Cool. This was DOM manipulation. So now I think you know why Vue, right? So yeah, let's go to the VueJS website. So Vue was created by uh, an engineer at Google. Now he's not an engineer at Google, named Ivan Yu. Really nice guy, and you can check it, check his Twitter. I think his okay, VueJS Twitter link, but you can find it, find him on Twitter. Like he posts frequently, and then what we are concerned is with the docs, right? Really good docs. So by the end of this training, you should be able to read like 80% of this. You should be able to, not you should read. If you want to get good at Vue.js, just start here, keep reading. There is not much, right? But solid docs. So you should read at least till composables. So I will link particular um, sections of this in the material in the batch. I will share it with you. But yeah, make sure you read those, right? So let's start here. The progressive JavaScript web framework. So what does progressive mean here? So basically in their terms, progressive means that you don't have to throw away your existing normal Vanilla JS project just to use Vue, right? You can just have pieces of your DOM controlled by Vue. You can say just control this, what do you say? When I created a div, just control this div, right? So Vue will just control this div and not meddle with rest of our logic or code. This is why they call it progressive. So progressively, you can have pieces of your uh, markup or HTML controlled by Vue, right? So we'll start simple. This way to get started is, so we won't worry about that. Let's go to quick start. We don't want npm anything. We just want to import this thing. Let's copy this, import it in our HTML, right? I pasted this. So let's clean up our code. Cool. View counter. So we'll implement the same counter with Vue now, right? So what did I do? I grabbed this Vue.js script. So it's JavaScript, right? So it will just import this script. And as you can see, there is already a message in the browser console. You are running a development build of Vue. Make sure use production build when deploying to production. So we are doing just that. That is fine. So Nikhil says example of progressive. The current desk interface uses Vue for file uploader and some parts of e-commerce web shop app, even though the rest of the app is built using jQuery. Nice, good example. So progressively, right? I think the print format is written in Vue, and then some file uploader was written in Vue. That was one of the first components to be rewritten in Vue. So that is why it is called the progressive, right? Progressively. Cool. Nice. Cool. So we have the script, and Vue is in. It is not doing anything. We have just imported the Vue code, but now we have to use it, right? So what we can do is, so when you have this script, right, it brings in the Vue library, and in your script you can just console.log Vue. You will see it logs a huge object. You don't have to worry about what this object is, but this makes sure that Vue has loaded properly, right? That's it. So we'll start. So Vue has a few things that we want. So as I said, right, we want to know, let Vue know that this is the piece that you control, right? So let's create a div, give it a ID of app, just a convention. You can call it anything you want. Generally, they call it app. And then I will add a button here, increment, and a p tag. This is where we started with the vanilla as well, right? This is where I am starting with the Vue as well. So let me just write first and then I'll explain what I'm doing. Create app and equal to Vue. So I'm just using JavaScript objects destructuring. So if you don't like, if this fears you, you can just think of it as this way. Create app. That is fine, right? So here you can tell Vue the configuration of the app that you want to create, right? So I was just saying, like when it comes to Vue, there are two APIs. You will find most of the new apps use the, so there are two APIs in Vue. So there is the options API, right? And then there is composition API. So this was added in Vue 3. So the version that we are going to learn, it is Vue 3. So it has both the APIs. So we'll start with the basics of options API, but then we'll shift to composition APIs because most of the Frappe apps are written using this. And some of, like, I think one app you will find using this. And if you are to use this API, that is fine as well. So in the documentation, you will find a switch. There is a switch, right, in the documentation between the options API and compositions API. So some developers prefer this, some prefer this. If you are coming from React, you will find this very familiar because it has a API similar to React ka hooks, right? And options API, clearly this sounds options, right? So you will have to pass around options. So the first two options that we'll learn are data and methods, right? So data is like, what is the data that you are working with, right? Or the state. Methods are like, what actions do you want to perform, right? Increment, for example, that are actions on the state, right? So for this particular example that we are going to take, we have a button called increment, right? And then we have a counter. So this zero that we are tracking, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, will be the data or the state, and increment, the method, will be stored inside methods. So this is what we are going to give to the options when we create a Vue app. And you can use both of them in conjunction as well. We are not going to cover that in this particular training, but I'll give you a basic idea of both so you can choose for yourself. But mostly we'll be working with composition API. Cool. Nice. So what did I do? I created an app, and here we have to provide options. So Let me just extract it out into a separate variable called options, and then I will pass it here, right? Let me just zoom in a bit. And as I said, right, there are a list of options that you can pass, but we'll start with just two. We'll start with data, and it has to be a function, right? It has to be a function that returns an object. Just view stuff. There are some uh, things that depend on this being a function because it can be dynamic, right? View calls it again and again. This is not a static object. So I'll say count 0. This is our data, right, for this counter app. And then we'll have methods. There can be multiple methods. So I will just have one increment. And this can be a function. And then this dot count plus plus. What am I doing? Let me just do this. I gave Vue two options, data and methods. Inside the data, I just have one property called count, which is initially 0. And then there is method called increment, which increments this counter. This refers to the data, like this object, right? And I have not wired it yet, but we have to first tell Vue to take control of this div. How do we do that? We just come here and say mount and give it the ID or like the element selector on which to mount, which we want to mount this app to, right? So now it is mounted, but still won't work because we haven't told Vue to listen to events or update this thing. But see how easy it is to wire that. I'll say v on. So whenever you see v dash anything, it is coming from Vue. It is not native HTML attribute, right? V on, click increment, right? We call increment. And then this 0 will feel like Jinja, but this is not Jinja. This is Vue's templating language, or I will come to that. And I will say count. Come here. See. What did I do? I said that on click call the increment, and this increment refers to this method, right? When Vue takes control of this app, it knows that this is a method, which means it will be given me in the methods. And this count, we don't have to do this dot count. Like Vue knows that if you're using this thing, it will be inside this. So count is 0, and then on increment it increments. Where is the DOM manipulation? But still the DOM updates, right? Still increment works. And now if I just want to implement reset, right? Let's implement reset again. Reset. And again v on. So this has a shortcut because again view on, how will you write, right? So you can just write at click, which is same as v on click. At click reset, and then I will define a method here, reset this dot count equal to 0. Nice. See so compare it with the code that we wrote before. Remember we were dynamically manipulating the DOM, right? Here, this is called reactivity, right? If you hear this term reactivity, nothing complex. It just is that uh, you are just updating the. Does Vue 3 manipulate or control DOM? Yeah, it does, like behind the scenes. So it does create its own nodes, which it calls V nodes or virtual nodes, which is part of the virtual DOM. They call it virtual DOM. So they have a data structure on top of the DOM, which they manage, and they efficiently update the DOM whenever needed. So Vue will listen to the changes in your data, listen to your changes. Like I'll share some resource that you can learn about how actually this thing works, how they can listen to data changes and update the DOM. But they will listen to data changes, right? If you change the data anywhere, for example, in this line, we change the data, right? it will go behind the scene. It will see where this count is being referred to and only update that particular node. That's it. So Nikhil says, so this is very close to HTML itself. React is closer to JS than HTML. Yes. So even better when we go into single file components, this also leads to a lot of cleanup. Right now we are using view in a mode where directly in our markup we are writing this template code. Next step would be to use some proper build setup. What if there are multiple count variables? Okay. You can have as many variables as you want. You can list of counters. But yeah, this is the options API where you are passing data and methods, and there are other options as well called computed watchers. But yeah, that's additional reading. This does this make sense? The concept of you not manipulating the DOM, but we got Vue to do that for us, and it gives us some nice syntax to bind event listeners, to have dynamic variables inside our HTML markup, so on and so forth. So Nikhil says about VDOM. VDOM is not actual DOM nodes. Yeah. So that's why I said like it creates its own objects called V node. It's not actual DOM node. So it's lightweight, and then update is also very cheap in virtual nodes and DOM. So think of VDOM as a huge data structure. And then whenever the VDOM updates, Vue updates the actual DOM and keeps them in sync. React also works in the same way. Thanks. Thanks, Nikhil, for posting that. Hopefully that will clear it up. So a lot of frameworks work in this fashion. There are a few that directly do the DOM, and I think one of them calls it Shadow DOM. I don't know which one, but yeah. So when you see a new framework, just look for some similarities and you'll somewhere find this reactivity system in place where you do the data stuff. Vue will make sure it keeps your UI in the sync. So sometimes you will find UI is a function of state, right? Kind of thing. But yeah, let's go a step further. Now we want to implement the to-do app in Vue, right? Not in vanilla, directly in Vue. So what I will do is when we go to quick start, right? Before this, we just directly imported Vue in our application, but we want a full-fledged VueJS project, right? Where everything is controlled by Vue, not progressive, not just a dev, everything. So in this section, we'll introduce how to scaffold a Vue project or a single page applications, which is what Insights is, which is what Builder is, which is what Game Plan is. These are all single page applications. The whole thing, routing, etc., everything is controlled by Vue. These are called single page applications because we'll come to that. There is just a single HTML page that is served from the server, but everything else happens on that page out of the box. Cool. So let's start here. npm create Vue latest. So if you want to follow along, just open up this page. Gushin, can you share this page in the chat? So I'll just go to Hussain, fs, and I will run this command npm create Vue at latest. So it is asking for the name of the project. In this case, let's call it Vue to do. Do you want to add TypeScript? No. So we won't be covering TypeScript in this training, but feel free to explore. There is like documentation as well on the VueJS docs. Do we want JSX support? No. By the way, Vue also supports JSX like React. Do check that out. Add view router? No, we want very simple. Add Pinia for state management? No. These are external libraries that can help you build even more sophisticated applications, etc. We want unit testing? No. We don't want end-to-end. We don't want ESLint. We don't want dev tools. That's it. So we'll cd into vue to do npm install. So this will install all the dependencies for this Vue project. Cool. Okay, it worked. And then let's open it up in VS Code. And you will see it created a lot of files and folders, but don't worry about it. I'll just open up the terminal and run npm run dev. So this will start up the development server. And then I will open it up in my browser. It says you did it. Let's zoom out. So you have successfully created a project with Vite plus Vue 3. So Vite is also built by the Vue team, and it is a tooling around, like it bundles and it processes your Vue app, and it has a builder, right? So it has a separate website. So if you want to learn about VueJS, so it's not just for VueJS, it's like a generic thing for front end, where get ready for a development environment that can finally catch up with you. Catchy. But yeah. So as you can see, so I used to pronounce this white for quite some time, and then I realized it is wheat. So that is why I think they added this wheat. They added the mic as well, that people might be pronouncing this white. But yeah, this is wheat. Is a build tool that aims to provide faster and leaner development experience for modern web projects. You can read it up, but in our case, you don't have to worry about it. It just helped us set up a modern single page application backed by Vue.js. Yeah, that's it. And so I can come here and let's take a look at what the project structure is. Here we have a configuration for Vite, right? We have a README, which we can let go of my project. So if you decide to push it to GitHub, it will be like the README. There is a package.json. So just like any other node project, right? You have this package.json file. Then we have some JS config. Index.html. So in the single page application, right? This is the single page that will be served. And you will see something similar, div ID app. And then there is main.js that is being loaded, right? And that main.js is inside SRC. So let's look at that main.js. It's loading some CSS file. So we don't want that. Let me get rid of that. It's getting create app, which is exactly what we did before as well. If you recall, we, instead of doing this, right? Because this is a modern single page application project. So this has this import ES6 features. But in the browser, when we did this view.create app, right? The same thing, the same create app is this. And instead of options, right, we were providing an options object. Remember, we are not providing an options, but we are importing something from some weird file called app.view and then mounting it to slash hash app, which means div with an ID of app, which is this thing, right? So in essence, we are giving Vue full control of this, and then we are mounting it. That's it. And if you see, since I removed the styling, it is gone. I will also clean up app.view. I don't want any of this. I will delete all of this, right? I'll just have one simple thing. Template. I'll explain what am I doing. H1. Hello. Yeah. And if you see this, you will see there is hello. Right. So let's do one thing. I want it on the side. So let's. My laptop is lagging for some reason. Even the 32 gig RAM is insufficient. Yeah. So what we are looking at right now is called a single file component, right? One file, one component. So view components, like the files or the single file components, have the extension .view, and there are three areas to it, like three pieces. There is the template part. There is a script part where you write your script, right? Where you write your logic. And there is a style part where you write your styles, right? We won't be using the styles for now. We'll just, and these are optional, by the way. You can have a template without the script as well. But, okay, let's go to main.js. So this is the entry point of your app. So whichever Frappe app you open or whichever VueJS project you open, you will either find main.js or index.js. The name, mostly these are the conventions, but this should match whatever is written here, right? Main.js. And we are creating a view app, right? And mounting it. And instead of options, we are mounting this component. This is called a component. And specifically in this case, it is a single file component, where in the single file you have the template as well as the script. And now we will use composition API instead of options API. So to use that, we can say script setup. This is it. And I'm going to write some code. Just bear with me. Reactive from view, right? Const data equal to reactive count 0 function increment. I'm implementing the same counter but with composition API. Okay. See, implemented the same count but with composition API. So composition API, in contrast to the options API, is not just like you pass in an object with the data and the methods. It is more close to JavaScript. You are just writing some function, and this is not inside a methods array, right? You are writing a, we'll come to the reactive part, but you wrote an object, right, which has a count equal to 0, and then you are doing some things on that object. DOM manipulation still happens behind the scenes. It is still reactive. I'll explain it in a bit. But this is composition API, right? Looks different. So compare this to what we were doing before. Even this was a, let's compare. It's distracting, but yeah. Yeah, compare the two. Here we are giving an object and then the data. So all the reactive data, right? All the state, all the things that we want to be dynamic or which has to trigger the DOM update needs to go inside this object only, right? So you group the methods together and you group the data together. Here, in contrast, in the composition API, you can group things however you want, right? You can have more data. So you can say counter to data, and then you can create one more reactive object here, right? And say count. This has separate count 0, right? And then it has its own increment method, so on and so forth. So you can have as many reactive objects and methods here. So yeah, but still the templating remains the same. This is shortcut for Vion, shorthand for Vion. Any doubts in this? We'll make a to-do app in composition API. So we'll learn more about aspects of what is this reactive thing doing here and what's actually happening, right? So if you don't give the setup here, right, Vue won't know that you are using composition API. So it's kind of an indication to Vue that inside this you are going to use the composition API. It makes some stuff. Okay, Prashant says I'm a little bit confused in options and composition API. So let's jump to Vue docs. So this is the switch I was talking about, right? Let's hit the question mark. API styles. So Vue components can be authored in two different API styles. So you should read the full page. I will just glance over it. Options API and composition API. So before Vue 3, there was only one API called the options API, right? Which looked like this, right? Where you had the data and the method. So this had to be followed, right? You can't write method anywhere and data anywhere. Like reactive data must go inside exactly the data function. Method should go inside method. Lifecycle hooks. So everything was like this, right? With composition API, we define a using imported API functions, right? In that case, we import stuff, right? For example, here we imported reactive, and then you can have functions that look like very normal JavaScript functions. And then you have hooks. So these are called hooks on mounted. Run this. We'll see what mounted is and what it is not. So these are two ways of writing the same thing. See, these are the same thing. Depends on the taste. By the way, behind the scene, this uses composition API. Behind the scenes, options API is using this reactive, etc. So I read about it like it's interesting. I will share this in the chat. Maybe Gurshin can share this page in the chat. So yeah, which to choose, you can read about it, your call. But there are some general, for learning purposes, go with the style that looks easier to understand you. Again, most of the core concepts are shared between the two styles. So I will read from the docs a lot in this training because they're good and they clear a lot of stuff. You can always pick up the other style later. For production use, go with options API if you are not using build tools. That means we won't be able to use this script setup, this etc. inside the browser example that we were using right now, right? So if I go back and open up our DOM counter, which is actually view counter, and open up index.html, you will see you can't use your script setup here because there is no build system. Build system as in Vue takes this file, right, and process it compiles it to normal JavaScript. If you paste this as is in your browser, it won't work, right? That is why for using composition, like composition API, you need to have this proper single page application build tool setup. So we will process this. We'll see the setup and it will properly process your functions and data. It will properly process your template, so on and so forth. Make sense? We were trying to make a to-do app. Let's do that. I'll get rid of this part. I'll get rid of this as well. So the order doesn't matter. You can write your script first and then template. Depends on the taste. You will find the examples on VueJS docs. Use write the script first and then the template, but mostly I prefer template on the top because you clearly know what is being rendered on the screen. So let's start by writing a to-do app. So I'll add a form just like that. We don't need any actions, right? I'll just write the markup first and then we'll come to the part with the view. Form and Let's give it, what are we trying to do here? Label for to do description, right? And then it also hot reloads if you see, right? As you type and save your file, it automatically reloads your project in the browser. And then we'll have an input. ID is equal to do description. Nice. So now we have an input and we'll have a submit value of create, right? This is what we had done in the vanilla part as well. We are doing that same in the VueJS part. So now what do we do, right? We have this, we can write hello, whatever we want, create, and it still submits somewhere. So we want to handle this event. So how do you attach event listener in Vue? You use v on, or for short at submit. I want to run my function. Let's call it handle, or let's call it create to do. Create to do. I will create that function here. Create to do console.log creating to do. Let's test it out. If you see again, we are facing the same issue because browser tries to do its default behavior. In Vue.js, when you have events, right? When you are attaching events like add submit or add click, you have some modifiers that you can attach directly, right? This modifiers, for example, there is a prevent modifier, which will do the same thing as e.prevent default did for us in vanilla part, right? It prevented the default behavior of this event. The submit default behavior is to submit to the backend, right? But here we just did dot prevent, and if you try now, by milk, create, see, creating to do. Makes sense? This is how we do events, handle events in Vue.js. But yeah, now let's have some. I need some reactive data, so I'm going to import this. Again, I'll come back to this, what it does. But for in the meantime, just know that this is what the thing that make sure that when you update the variable, it updates the DOM. Because if you just create this normal variable, right? Let's say I create a normal variable, let count equal to 0, right? Just watch this carefully. And I have a paragraph tag, count, right? See, it is 0. I come here, I say count plus plus. Okay, wait. On create to do, let's say count plus plus. And when I create this, as you can see, it is not incrementing. Why? Because it's a normal variable. So to make sure that Vue knows that whenever this variable changes, it has to update the DOM or update the UI, it has to be a reactive thing, right? It has to be a reactive variable. Reactive in the sense it will react to changes to these variables, right? So I will remove this. So that is why we'll need this reactive thing. Let's create to-dos. You can say to-dos, or let's call it data itself for now. You can call it anything. Reactive, it has to be reactive. And then to-dos, empty list. Or we can have by milk here. Okay. So how do we render this data here, right? In Vanilla JS, what did we do? We created a inner HTML with lot of li tags and appended it to the DOM. Here, we are not the one who is managing the DOM, so we can't go and tell that create li tags and append it. So Vue has some constructs for this. One of them is, let's come here. We want an ordered list, li, and we want this li for each to do, right? So we have v for, again provided by VueJS, not a normal HTML thing. To do in data.todos. So it will create one li tag for each to do. Then you can say to do. See, as soon as I hit save, this is what we have, right? And if you add more to this list, learn view, see, makes sense? So view v for is used to iterate over some list and render multiple of these things, right? So we are rendering one li tag for each to do in to dos. Nice. So now you might have thought how we can create a new to do. We can just say, so we don't need this, right? For example, let's say create to do. We can just say data dot to dos dot append. I always do append. It is push by more milk, and whenever I hit create, see. So we are just worrying about the data, not about updating the UI, right? Earlier, just compare it to the one we did before, which was we had to re-render, right? We had to update the DOM here, which we don't have to because this is reactive. Vue knows that whenever to do changes, anything that refers to do in the UI has to change. In this case, this will be this thing. Make sense? So how do you actually get this input that they are typing, right? We don't have to get the form, process the form. We just want this input, right? We don't want to give it a name as well. So Vue lets us do that as well. Let's say we just delete this part. We delete this part as well. Empty to do, nothing is rendered, that is fine. We want to do description. I'm creating one more property here, which will be empty string. And I want this description to be whatever the user types in this input, right? How do I do that? Again, Vue has some features. So you come to your input and you say v model equal to data dot to do description. What did we do? We used a directive. These are called directives, right? V directives. We are binding this input to this property. And we can render it as well. So I will show you what is actually happening here. So let's render it here. Data dot to do description. Let's render it inside a pre tag. Not that much, but okay. Come on. What am I missing? Oh, no, no. I modeled it in the wrong thing. See, I have attached this to do description to the button and not the text. Let's attach it to the text and still doesn't work. Nice. Yeah, works for some reason. So sometimes it doesn't auto refresh, just refresh your browser tab and it will work. So if you see, as I'm typing, it is also updating that variable. So this is what magic it does. And if you update the variable, it will update the input. See, two-way binding. This is called two-way binding. So when you change the input, it will change the variable. And when you change the variable, it will change the input. So in this case, we don't want this. So let's see. And we also don't want this description now because we now know that they are bound. And when we hit create, what do we want? When the user hits create, we want to use this, whatever description they have given. Now we have bound it to to-do description and add it to our to-dos list, which should be easy. We can just say data.todos dot push data.todo description. And let's try it out. See, you just care about managing your state. We will care about updating the UI. And if you want to reset this, easy. Set it to an empty string. And now you can say buy milk, create. And it got reset to an empty thing, right? By water nowadays, right? It worked, still worked. So what did we learn? We learned for iterating over some set of data and rendering one li tag for each. We learned vmodel. So vmodel is very useful. It lets you attach to not just text inputs, but any kind of input. So right now, if I want to implement a color feature, which we'll do after a quick break, I will just have to create an input and again have a vmodel. So what was I saying? Like reactive, right? The thing that we imported. Let's understand that. Like, what do you mean by reactivity? Let's understand reactivity first. So, reactivity. Right? So you have some variable, right? You have some variable called count, right? Which was 0, right? Can be anything, like, or in our case, it was 0. And there is your UI part where this is being used, right? So it is 0. So consider like a normal variable you created in JavaScript, let count equal to 0, right? Then you incremented it, right? You rendered it in the DOM. You rendered it in the DOM, for example. Then you incremented it. So remember in our case when we were doing vanilla JavaScript, we had to manually again update the DOM. In this case, we didn't need to, right? In Vue's case, it went and updated the DOM for us. So how is it doing it? This is reactivity. So it is reacting to the changes to our variables. And this cannot be normal variables because in normal variables, you can't know when you are changing it, right? A equal to 2, B equal to 3, C equal to A plus B. So normal variables can't be listened for reactivity because Vue doesn't know that, okay, this thing I have to listen to. So for that, Vue provides us two constructs. One is reactive, other is ref. So we saw reactive. It lets us create an object that is reactive, and then you can have multiple properties on it. Object or dictionary, you can call them. So both are functions, by the way. So you can call them with an initial. So reactive mostly will call with an object. Ref can be any value, right? It can be Boolean, it can be string, but just a single value. So it holds a single value. Here, if you give object, it will be holding a single object. Like object can have multiple properties, but reactive is also always an object. And when you have something inside a reactive variable, right? Suppose count 0, and you change it, Vue knows that it has to react to it. It has to update the DOM, right? So when you change it to 1, Vue will get a signal somehow it has written a system around it that it can listen to any changes in this particular object because we are using reactive, and it will see, okay, count got updated, right? It got updated to 1. So wherever we are referring to count using this syntax, it will go and update that part, right? It will make sure 0 becomes 1. This is why we don't have to manually update the DOM, right? Because it can react to our variable changes. It can react to the changes in our state. Makes sense? That is why when we had an empty list, there were no to-dos, right? So we had a for example. Let me tell you how v-for worked. So when we had an empty list, this was also inside reactive. We named it to-dos, and we were using it inside the template using v-for, right? To do in to-dos. You will see that, okay, this to-dos list, right? This was a list or an array, is being used in the template. And when you push anything new to this array, the reactivity will kick in, and this will be re-rendered, right? This will be updated in the DOM for you. So this will make sure that if new elements are there, it will re-render. If elements are being edited, it will update them, so on and so forth. So this is the concept of reactivity, nothing complex. So if you want to learn how this works actually behind the scenes, how Vue is able to do it, look for a concept called JavaScript proxies. I will share the documentation if you are curious on how Vue is implemented such a thing. But yeah, this is reactivity. And the other thing, ref, as I said, similar thing, but it has one main difference. Here you will be able to say data dot anything, right? Here it has to be dot value, right? So when you create a ref, let's say is loading, you say it's a ref false, right? It starts as false. And when you want to update this variable, right, you have to make sure you do it using dot value equal to true. So you have to use dot value because it's not a normal variable, right? It's a ref. We'll see an example. Let's implement delete first, and then we'll implement some more. So there is a question before I go. So Prashant asks, does it render from start every time? No. That's why I said, right? Rendering from start will be meaning like throwing away the DOM nodes and again re-rendering them, which is costly, heavy, right? So what it will do is it has its own structure which we call the virtual DOM. So for example, in case of to-dos, it will be ordered list, li, 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 vdom. It will see that a new li tag got appended, right? It will see you called dot push, right? And it will see new to do in the list. It will go to that. So first it will update its virtual DOM. So it will append it here. This is the virtual DOM, not the actual DOM. Actual DOM still has the old data, right? So I'm telling you what happens when Vue reacts. Ha, no pun intended. So this is the original DOM. Let's call it DOM. This is the virtual DOM, right? This is the original DOM. This is the original DOM. This has 3 LIs. This is the virtual DOM. It has 4 now because we appended 1. So now what Vue will do is it will match the 2. What changed and what is the minimum thing we have to do to get them in sync, right? So what's the minimum thing? We create a new li node and append it here. This is the minimum operation that can be done without overriding anything else. So it is not doing it from scratch. It is doing it in a very smart way. very optimized way, right? That is why all this we are dealing with, right? To get that benefit, that efficiency, that developer experience. Short. Cool. Let's implement delete, right? So how can we do that? So we'll add a button first. Button, delete, trash can. And now each to do has a button. That's nice. Doesn't work, but it is there. And now we can do interesting stuff here. We can say on click of this, we'll call a function called delete to do, right? With the index. So how will we get the index of this to do? So v-for has like additional stuff which you can rely on. You can do this. And it will also give you index of the to do, right? So let's implement delete to do here. Delete to do index. I'll just console log it for now. Let's open up JavaScript console. Let's add a few to-dos first before we can delete. See, if I click on one, it has an index of 0. If I click on this one, it has an index of 1. So Vue is properly giving us the index and we are passing it to the delete to do function. That is very nice. But now what we have to do to delete? Data dot to do same splice JavaScript function. At index, we want to remove one object. Let's add some delete, delete, delete. Not a single line of DOM manipulation, right? We are just updating the list. Vue reactivity kicks in, it will update the DOM. That's it. Want to do more? Let's do one more. Let's do mark as completed, right? So let's add a few to-dos and let's add one more button. Complete. Let's add a green tick emoji here, right? So at click, mark as complete. Which to do? Again, we have the index, so easily we can implement this now. We have the index. But where do we store this, right? Where do we store this information that this to do is completed or this to do is not completed, right? For example, when we have buy milk, how do we mark it complete, right? We'll have to store somewhere that this to do is complete or not. So instead of to do's being a simple string, we'll make it an object which will have a description, right? Now this will become a list of objects instead of just a list of strings, and we'll have is completed equal to false to start with, right? And then mark as complete will do nothing, but it will say mark this true. Make sense? So it starts at false, but whenever they click on complete, it is marked as completed. And we don't want to show this button for completed to-dos. But see, since we updated the logic, we'll have to update this part as well. So instead of this, we just render description. Nice. So now you can delete is working. Complete is working behind the scene, but we are not using it anywhere in the UI. So we can say, so this is where conditionals come in, right? We have to conditionally either strike it or not strike it depending on whether it is complete or not, right? So there is an HTML I think it is called del. And then if I render anything inside it, it will render it with strike through formatting. See, this is the strike through formatting I was talking about. But we want to do this conditionally, not for every to do. So we have if. So we want to do this only if, right? Only if this to do is completed. See, since we have if, we'll also have else. So let's have a p tag, or let's have a span that works too. We else, we want to render it normally. Then I will explain. Give me a moment. Okay, see. So now if you mark something complete, it will be strike through, right? So what is happening? We will come here, we'll come inside this loop. It will check v if to do is completed, right? Is completed. So if this is true, then it will render this node, which is del. If it is not true, it will go to v else. In that case, it will render it as normal span, right? So if I refresh this, add one more to do. So in this case, is completed will be false, right? And instead of rendering this strike through text, it will render the normal text. But as soon as I click complete, this will become true and Vue will kick in the reactivity system after this line, right? And the DOM will be updated. There is one issue. We don't want to show the complete button if it is already completed. So again, we can use if. We can say show this only if to do dot is completed is not completed. See, now it is gone. So that version button will be only visible until this thing is not completed. Once it is completed, gone. So imagine doing this in the DOM, right? We'll have to make sure we update the DOM in proper places. We make sure we hide the button, show the button. You will find a lot of this code in Frappe's jQuery side of things, which is hard to manage now, right? So yeah, reactivity gives a lot of benefits. Right? Nice. So I hope I was able to give you a glimpse of the power of Vue. And there is just one thing we'll cover before wrapping up today's session. Tomorrow we will directly start with Tailwind and a project with dynamic data coming in from a server. We'll see computed when we are doing the e-commerce project. I think that will come there. It was a good introduction. So I'll send you some essential reading along with the recording. Expect it by tonight. So before sleeping, I'll make sure I send it. So you can be prepared for tomorrow. I'll try to send it as soon as possible. Some exercises, essential reading. Apart from reactive, we also have ref. So let's import ref. And since we learned I'll create a ref form shown, or let's call it display form equal to ref will start at false. So display form is false. So I will add a if here. If not if display form. See, what did I do? I created a reactive variable. Like this is also reactive in the sense of reactivity, not actual reactive function we are calling ref, and it starts at false, right? So that's why if is false. So none of this is rendered. But there is one more thing that we have is we show. it might appear that it does the same thing. It will only show if this thing is true, right? But we show renders it in the DOM and only hides it via CSS. So if you open up the DOM and look in the body of it, see, the form is still there, but the style is display none. That's the difference between VIF and VShow. If I do VIF, the form will not be there. And nothing is there. See, it is empty. So it does not render that in the DOM. It will completely remove it. But if we do VShow, it it will be in the DOM, but it will be hidden using CSS. Right. So see, display none. That's the difference between VShow and VIF. So if there is something you just want to keep rendered and toggle show and not to show, then VShow is good. And how do we show the form? Let's add a button here. Button show form and or click. By the way, here you can directly write expressions as well. You don't have to write function. Give a function. You can directly say display form dot value equal to dot value. See, so whenever you want to update or access it, right here, Vue will figure out that you are giving it a ref and it will automatically do dot value for you. But if you are manually doing this stuff, you have to do this. Let's see. Okay, what did I do? Let's check the console. Cannot root property value. Okay, it automatically does that whenever you do it in the template. That's cool. Nice. So when I click on show form, see, the form is displayed, right? But if we were to do this from here, we'll have to do dot value instead. That's the main difference. It has to be dot value because then only like you will be able to figure out that it changed and reactivity system and so on. So if you directly do this, it is completely overridden, right? The variable refers not to your reference, but to something else completely. That is why make sure you do dot value. So how to use ternary operator? As I said, right here, you can use expressions as well. So you can say we show, uh, let's take a good example. Okay, ternary has a good example. So let's say toggle form, right? Display form. If display form equal to it returns. Let's do it in a function because this will become. Is this a good example? Fine. Anyways, let's do it. So this will be easy because we just have to take this part. I'll explain what am I doing. So if you see now, if I click again, it toggles because we are setting the value of display form to whatever it was not, right? So if it was true, it becomes false. It was false, it becomes true. So you can use ternary operator. Toggle form is true. Form is shown. Oh, not toggle form. Display form is not shown. Very silly example, but This is how you can use ternary. So if the display form is true, then it will display render this, otherwise it will render this. Similarly, this expression you can use inside vshow as well, vif as well. Yeah. Mark is complete. It just sets the is completed to true. Prashant says, thanks for session. Need to understand more to overcome confusion. Yeah, you have to practice. Like watching me do this is very different than doing it yourselves.